Hey everyone, this is just going to be a short video talking about the first writing assignment and what I expect of you and what I hope for you to do. So here I'm just going to go through the assignment page and discuss what I would like you to do. Please watch this whole video before you start on your assignment. Some students don't and then don't end up following the instructions and then have to rewrite the assignment after the fact, which is no fun. All right, so what's going on here? This is the writing assignment in ethics, and it's going to be on the topic of abortion. There are two main arguments in the topic of abortion that we discussed in last week in lecture, and I want you to pick one basically and write about it. So here's what's going on. The due date is Friday, February 5th, which is Friday, February 5th. I don't know when you're going to be watching this video, so I can't say how far it is from the day that I'm recording that. That is 10 days from now, I think, something like that. All right, so late papers, that is, if you turn your paper in late, they will receive a 10% penalty. This is an across the board situation for this class. Anytime you turn anything in late, it will receive a 10% penalty, but don't fret. I mean, so basically, if you're going to turn it in late, expect to turn it in late sort of later, right? Like do some good work on the paper. What you really just don't want to do is turn it in, like an hour late. If you turn it in an hour late, that's sad because then it gets the 10% penalty. But if you turn it in a few days late and you have extra time to work on it, then maybe you'll have improved on it in a significant enough way that it'll offset the 10% penalty. All right, the instructions for the paper is to write an 800 to 1,000 word paper in which you analyze one of the two main arguments that we discussed for or against the moral permissibility of abortion. So my suggestion is that you choose the argument that you disagree with. That is the argument to the conclusion that you think is wrong, right? So question, do you think that that there are some cases in which abortion is permissible? If you think no, then you want to take Thompson's argument on. And if in the other case you think if you think that common cases of abortion are permissible rather than impermissible, then you want to take on the flow argument. So write your paper following the following structure. So in part one, I want you to introduce the argument that you're going to be discussing, right? And so literally you can lay out the argument right at the top of your paper. Just give me, make a sentence saying, in this paper, I'm going to be discussing this argument, and then give me the argument, premise one, premise two, conclusion, right? If there are anything else. You might also, in this part of the paper, include any preliminaries, any like preliminary assumptions, maybe like a moral principle or any assumptions that are getting made or definitions that need to be clear for you to understand the argument. In part two, then I want you to explain the argument. That is, you need to explain each of the premises. First, you need to explain the preliminary assumptions, like what they say, what they mean. You need to explain any moral principles that are given, and then you need to explain each premise. So you need to talk about the premise. You need to say why you think, or somebody might think, the premise is true, why somebody might think the premise is plausible. That is, if somebody has a reason for the premise, right? So basically just each premise, take it, give it its own little paragraph where you talk about the premise and you say why somebody might believe that premise. Then once you've explained each of the premises, you need to explain how it is that the premises support the conclusion. So all of these arguments are valid arguments. And so that means that the premises, if true, guarantee that the conclusion is true. And so you can kind of just talk a little bit about that. You can sort of go back through the argument really quickly and say something like, well, if this is true and this other thing is true, then it's got to be the case that the conclusion follows. All right, part three. So once you've got the argument explained, then and you've explained each of the premises and why somebody might believe each of the premises, then what I want you to do in part three is to pick the premise that you disagree with, right? So if you disagree with the argument as a whole, then there's got to be a premise that you disagree with. And this can be a little bit tricky, but you got to pick the premise that you think you can argue against. So pick the premise that you think is that you can argue against, and then try to argue that the premise is false. And this involves, giving examples or giving like other kinds of reasons that for thinking that the premise is false. You are totally free to use anything that I've said in class and lecture, anything that's in the Thompson article or in the Corman chapter, anything that you like, really. I generally suggest not going outside the bounds of the readings onto, the random parts of the internet, but you can do that. Also, I just highly suggest then that you cite that and let me know where to find it in case I need to look at it. All right. So yeah, explain why you think that the premise that you've chosen is false, and then explain basically how that, if that premise is false, the argument kind of falls apart. If you want to go above and beyond and you have space in the 800 to 1,000 words at this point, you can finish your discussion by discussing sort of how your argument in part 3 might go back and forth between somebody that disagrees with you, right? So like if you have this little, you can imagine in your head, right? Somebody that really likes the argument that you're arguing against, and then you've chosen one of the premises to argue against, and then you've given your argument against it, and then somebody might respond to you and say like, well, wait a minute, what about this? We can talk about that too if you would like in the live discussion of this, of talking about this paper that's going to be on Friday. Let's see, Friday the 29th. All right. So here are the two arguments, right? The violinist argument. If it's permissible to unplug oneself from the violinist in the situation that we've been given by Thompson, then it's permissible to terminate a pregnancy that is the result of rape. It is permissible to unplug oneself from the violinist. Therefore, it's permissible to terminate a pregnancy that is the result of rape. And then, sort of this additional, therefore, it is permissible to have an abortion in some cases. And then the FLO argument, the future like ours argument, if one deprives someone of a future like ours, then one has done something immoral, right? This is supported generally by intuition. Common cases of abortion involve depriving a fetus of a future like ours. So common cases of abortion involve doing something immoral. All right, technical details, please use normal margins, a normal font size, and submit your paper in a doc or PDF format on Canvas. And please include a word count and your name at the top of the paper. As well as down here, let's see, if you would like feedback on your paper, that is, if you would like me to comment on it, then please write near your name, feedback, please. Some students don't care about feedback or just don't look at it, and it's a waste of my time to give you feedback if you're not going to look at it. So if you will look at it, then write feedback, please, at the top. If you won't look at it, then just take your grade. And if you want to discuss what you did or didn't do right on the paper, then you can come to office hours and we can talk about it. All right, so finally, this last thing I want to talk to you about is our general rules of writing. I think it's really important to know some of these. These are sketchy, but this is generally a good rule of thumb set of rules to follow when you are learning to write, especially at this point in your college career. So what should you do in this kind of paper? This kind of paper is not, an English paper. So don't follow the 5-paragraph format where you have this really general introduction and really general conclusion. And you start off the paper being like, since the dawn of time, people have been worried about abortion. No, don't do that. Don't do that at all. Jump right in. Just start talking about the argument. Say, hey, I'm going to talk about this argument. I'm going to talk about this argument, and I'm going to, and then just start doing it. Beyond that, so then there are these sort of general rules of writing. First, try to say only true things when you're writing, right? Don't say anything that you aren't sure about or think might be false, right? As if it's true. So if you're not sure whether or not a certain sentence is true, then you need to go back to the material and determine whether it's true before you put it in your paper. And if you can't determine whether or not a sentence is true, then you should either leave it out of your paper or you should hedge, like using a word like it seems to me, or it might be the case that. 2, say things simply and clearly. Do not try to be fancy or use obtuse philosophical jargon. Those are 3 big philosophical words, right? Don't use big, dumb words when you can avoid them. If you can explain something using simple and clear language, you should always do that. If you are going to use a obtuse philosophical jargon piece of language, then you should define or explain that. It's a technical term. It needs to be explained, and you need to, show your audience how they ought to use the term to, both show that you understand the term and show them how to understand the term in your writing. 3, and this is the most important part, make sure you understand the material. You got to make sure you understand the material backwards and forwards so that when you write in a way that allows both the professor to understand your writing and allows the professor to see that you understand the material thoroughly. That is, you need to learn, you have 2 jobs. You need to both understand the material and write in such a way that it communicates that you understand the material. Now, that's the harder part, right? Getting good at writing in such a way that you can communicate that you understand the material to someone in writing, hard. This, though, is the most important part of writing a paper in college. So if you can figure out how to do this and write in this kind of way, it'll show your professor that that you really understand the material, and it will allow you to do very well in most endeavors in college. All right, and then finally, be sure to structure your paper and be consistent in the words that you use and the sentences and sentence structure that you use. I don't want like run-on sentences. I don't want you using one word at the beginning of your paper for something and another word at the end of your paper for something. Basically, make sure you do some proofreading. Make sure you do some proofreading and that you pull out things that are confusing. What I generally try to do is read a paper out loud to myself and read each sentence out loud and see if it sounds funny. If it sounds funny, then I nix it or I change it or something. That's the best and easiest way to proofread your own papers. Yeah, and then generally, try to make your paper flow, and that is like, doesn't feel choppy or like you're jumping from point to point. And try to do that, you try to use transitions, but we're not going to talk about that. That's not neither here nor there. And just FYI, editing your paper for everything you ever write should take longer than writing your first draft. You should spend more time agonizing over whether or not you use the right words than your first draft. Your first draft, you should just bang out. You should just write it real fast, get it out there on the page, in the roughest shape that you can, trying to figure out close to what you need to be writing. And then you should then be editing it, and you should make sure that each part of the paper works together and actually addresses the prompt. All right, hopefully that is helpful. And if you have any questions about this, feel free to email me. And that's it.